January 24th, 1940. London, England. The city was darkening under the shadow of war, though the streets still bustled with life. In the midst of the daily grind, beneath the noise of busy market stalls and the sound of horses' hooves against cobblestones, there was an undercurrent of unease. It was palpable, but it was also strangely invisible, like a storm gathering somewhere out of sight. People went about their business, but each footstep carried the weight of something unspoken. A quiet tension lingered, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Florence Wheeler had spent her entire adult life within this pulse of the city, practicing as a midwife, delivering babies into the world with tender care, far removed from the chaos of politics and the battlefield. She had built her reputation not just on skill, but on her quiet grace and the empathy she extended to every mother she tended to. There was a delicate kind of beauty in the work she did, the way life was brought into the world in the quiet of night or the quiet of early morning, with only the hum of the wind outside and the crackle of the hearth to break the silence. But today, as Florence stood in the dim light of a room that smelled faintly of lavender and new linens, she could sense something was different. Her hands, steady and practiced as they were, lingered a moment too long on the soft face of the newborn she had just helped into the world. The moment felt fragile, more so than it had ever felt before. The baby's first cry had come and gone, echoing across the room, but it was followed by something darker, something that pricked at her senses. She set the baby down in the crib, gently arranging the swaddling blanket around it. The mother, her face pale from exhaustion but softened by relief, smiled weakly at the child. Florence smiled back, a warmth in her chest for the miracle she had just witnessed. But then, through the small window on the far side of the room, the distant rumble of an air raid siren sounded, its wail almost indistinguishable from the cries of the baby. For a moment, Florence paused, her hand on the window pane, looking out into the growing dusk. The siren sound was becoming more frequent, a reminder that life, as she knew it was changing, had already changed. She could feel in her bones. There was something about the city now that had become harder to ignore. She could hear the way people spoke in hushed tones in the streets. See how the soldiers who once passed without notice now wore their anxiety on their sleeves, their eyes constantly darting to the sky. War was creeping into their lives, and they had yet to fully understand its shape or size. Florence shook the thought away. She had never let fear cloud her focus, especially in a room like this, a room filled with life, not death. She turned back to the mother, who was now cooing softly to her child, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. But Florence's mind was elsewhere, drifting between the child and the crib and the sound of the sirens. She could feel a dissonance growing inside her, the very fabric of her world beginning to stretch, unravel even. The mother's voice broke her concentration. "Do you think it will be all right, Florence? This war, do you think it will end soon?" Florence hesitated. It was the question that everyone had been asking, but no one had the courage to answer. Her hands folded in front of her, the trained professional in her holding back the weight of the uncertainty she too felt. "We can only hope, love," she replied softly. Her words were empty of conviction, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if they were meant to reassure the mother or herself. There was no more certainty in the air now. The whispers of war were slowly becoming a tangible, dangerous presence. As Florence made her way to the door, she felt a strange pull in her chest, the kind you get when you're about to make a decision that will change everything. She had heard rumors in the streets, rumors of things being hidden, of things being passed on in the night by people whose faces she had seen but never thought twice about. Her husband, a railway engineer, had come home late just the other week, his face taut with anxiety. He didn't speak of the whispers at the station, but Florence knew. She stepped into the night air, the cold biting at her skin, and walked toward the small back alley where she had often passed unnoticed. But tonight was different. There was a man waiting for her, his silhouette barely visible against the dim glow of the street lamp. "Florence," he whispered, his voice low. It was the same man who had been a regular at the clinic for the past several months, a man she had never really paid attention to, but who now seemed to be in every corner of her life. She didn't know his name, though she was fairly certain he wasn't one of the regular families she'd seen around. He came to her for help, for medical advice, for assistance in delivering babies, and sometimes for things she couldn't quite place. The air felt thick around them as he approached, his hands shaking ever so slightly. "I need your help. You're the only one I trust." Her heart skipped a beat. Florence had always trusted her instincts, and right now they were screaming at her to walk away, to not get involved in something she didn't understand. She had no desire to risk her position, her life, everything she had worked for, on something she didn't know the full extent of. But she was too kind, too curious, and the man's desperation was almost palpable. She looked up at him, studying his eyes. His face was weathered, but his eyes, wide with fear, told a story that sent a shiver down her spine. "What do you need, exactly?" Her voice was steady, but it didn't mask the unease that settled deep in her chest. The man leaned in, his words almost lost in the rushing wind. "You see things, Florence. You're in places others aren't. You hear things others don't. What you don't realize is that what you've been hearing, it's important. You've been seeing things, military plans, things that aren't supposed to be anywhere near a midwife's hands. But the problem is, you're not the only one who's noticed. The wrong people are starting to notice." Florence felt the weight of his words settle on her, pressing down on her chest like an iron anchor. "What are you saying?" Her voice cracked slightly, the realization dawning on her. This wasn't a request for help. This was a warning she didn't know how to process. "Just be careful. The next time someone asks for your help," he whispered, "think twice about what you say. People are listening, Florence, and some of them aren't on our side." With that, he disappeared into the night, leaving her standing in the alley, her breath rising in visible puffs as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. For the first time in a long time, Florence didn't feel safe. She didn't feel like she had control of her world anymore. As she walked back to her flat, her thoughts circled like a restless tide. What had she just been drawn into? And why had she never noticed before? Her work, once so clear and simple, had become entangled with something much larger, something dangerous. It was one thing to bring new life into the world. It was another to hold the key to secrets that could change the fate of nations. But the question that gnawed at her most was this: how could she continue her work, saving lives, when the very fabric of those lives had been laced with secrets and lies? How much longer could she remain in the shadows, invisible to the very forces she had once believed were there to protect her? Florence had unwittingly become a part of something bigger than herself, and she had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. What she didn't know, however, was that her involvement had only just begun. The world was about to shift beneath her feet, and she would have to make a choice that could cost her everything. June 15th, 1941. Bristol, England. The war was no longer something distant, a rumble in the background of life. It was here, in every street corner, in every conversation, in every glance exchanged between strangers. The city had learned to live with the constant hum of the air raid sirens, the daily uncertainty of what would come next. People had adapted, their fear buried beneath a thick layer of routine. But for Florence Wheeler, it was no longer just a sound in the distance. It was now part of her world, part of the fragile balance she had once so carefully maintained. The whispers had grown louder, and the faces of those who had come to her for care had changed, hardened, become something other than what they once were. Florence's life had taken on a quiet rhythm since the moment that man in the alleyway had spoken to her. Every day, she performed her duties as if nothing had changed, but she knew it had. There was a weight to her every step now, a heaviness that settled in her chest when she thought too hard about it. She kept waiting for something to happen, a slip, a mistake, a misstep that would set the wheels of fate in motion. But nothing came. Not yet. Instead, the world seemed to be closing in on her, inch by inch, its edges blurring like the fog rolling off the Bristol River. She had been expecting the phone call for days. The man had told her she would be needed again soon, but he hadn't specified when. She had nearly forgotten about their conversation, buried it under the stack of deliveries and appointments that filled her days. It wasn't until late that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the streets in shadows, that she received the call. Her heart tightened the moment the phone rang, and she felt the familiar unease curl up in her stomach like a sickness. It was him. "I need you," he said, his voice low, as always, as if he were speaking from the depths of a darkened room. "There's something you need to see. Tonight." Florence didn't question him. There was no point. She hadn't questioned him the first time. She had simply followed the trail he had set before her. And here she was again, about to walk deeper into a world she had no business being in. But she had been pushed too far now, and there was no turning back. She was already in it. The directions were simple. He had left a note for her in the same place as before, tucked beneath the loose brick at the base of the alley wall. She walked to the spot, her feet quickening with each step, as if they knew what was coming before she did. When she reached the alley, she crouched down, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough stone until they found the hidden paper. She unfolded it carefully, her heart thumping in her chest. A single address, a name she didn't recognize. The world outside was alive with noise as she walked, the usual chatter and laughter from the pubs and the street vendors muffled by the urgency in her mind. Her thoughts were racing, torn between fear and curiosity, between the life she had known and the one she had been pulled into. She had never asked for any of this. She had never asked to become the keeper of secrets. She had never asked to know the things that made her heart race with fear. But she was here, and there was no escaping it now. The house she was led to was a small, unassuming place on the edge of the city. Its windows were dark, the shutters closed tightly, as if it were a house that had been forgotten by time. The kind of place that blended in with the shadows, unnoticed by those who walked by it every day. Florence paused for a moment before knocking, her pulse quickening as she imagined what she was about to walk into. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, the air thick with the kind of tension that made every breath feel like a struggle. The door opened before she had a chance to knock again, and the man stepped out from the darkness, his face barely visible in the dim light. His eyes locked on hers, and in that moment, she knew this was no ordinary meeting. This wasn't just about a note or a favor. This was about something much bigger. Florence stepped over the threshold, her breath hitching in her throat as the door closed behind her with a soft click. The room was small, dimly lit by a single candle on a table in the corner. Maps were spread across the walls, some pinned, others tacked up in haste, as though they were constantly being rearranged. The man gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, unsure of what to do next. "You've seen things," he said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "Things that others haven't noticed. You've been listening, Florence, and now it's time to act." Florence didn't speak at first. She didn't know what he meant by acting or what he expected from her. She had been a midwife her entire life, a healer, a caretaker, not someone who was meant to be involved in things like this. But she had already crossed that line. There was no going back. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would break the delicate tension in the room. The man took a step closer to her, his eyes scanning her face, as if searching for something. "You're not just delivering babies anymore, Florence," he said quietly. "You've become a part of something far more dangerous. And I need you to keep your eyes open. You need to listen closely, understand what's being said around you. What you don't realize is that the information you hear, the things you overhear, the conversations you aren't supposed to be part of, they matter. More than you know." Florence felt a chill run down her spine. The words were heavy, but they didn't feel like a warning. They felt like an invitation to something she wasn't ready to be a part of, but was already too deep in to back out of. "You think it's just the war, don't you?" the man continued, his voice low, almost a growl. "You think it's just about bombs and soldiers and air raids. But it's more than that. They're hiding things, Florence. Things that will change the course of this war. And they don't want people like you to know. People like you, who hear things, who see things. You're dangerous. Do you understand?" Florence nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what he was talking about. Not fully, but something in a way he spoke made her feel as though her life had already been irrevocably altered. "I'm not a spy," she said, her voice trembling slightly, as if trying to convince herself as much as him. "I don't know anything about espionage." Neither did I," he interrupted, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "But that doesn't matter anymore. The world is changing, Florence, and the question is, are you going to stand by and do nothing, or are you going to help us change the course of history? It's in your hands now." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and heavy. Florence swallowed hard, the weight of them pressing down on her chest. She had become something she hadn't asked to be. She had become a part of a war she hadn't chosen to fight. But the truth was, she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when she had seen the things she had seen, when she had heard the things she had heard. And so, she stood there, in the dim light of that small, forgotten room, knowing that she had just crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. The man's voice brought her back to the moment, his words cutting through her thoughts. "Keep your eyes open. The next time you hear something, pass it on. Don't question it. Just pass it on. You'll know what to do." Florence nodded, though she didn't fully understand what she was agreeing to. The man turned and left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving her in the silence of the room, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what role she was about to play in this secret war that was raging beneath the surface of everything she had ever known. But she did know one thing. The woman who had once delivered babies into the world was no longer the same, and the world outside had changed forever. Florence Wheeler was now a part of something much bigger than herself, something dangerous, something that could destroy everything she had worked for. And there was no going back. November 12th, 1943. London, England. The city was a patchwork of darkened streets and flickering lamplights, its scars from years of bombing campaigns etched deeply into its bones. The war had raged on for years, and with each passing day, the world fell heavier. Every building seemed to whisper of lives lost, of futures stolen, of histories rewritten. The air was thick with a sense of fatigue, the kind that seeped into your skin and bones after too many years of conflict, too many nights spent huddling in shelters, praying for the dawn. People had learned to live with uncertainty, to exist in the shadow of destruction. But Florence Wheeler had learned that there was no room for uncertainty when you knew too much.